Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of The Process. I am James Pack, concept artist and instructor at Brainstorm School. This week we'll be diving into a full digital painting, no photos this time, but just doing a full painting of a a bit of a fan art of the movie Dune. So let's go ahead and take a deeper dive into the steps, the process, some of the mindset behind the decisions, and let's go. All right, so I'm starting over here with a basic sketch. This little sketch that I have is pretty much just something that's in my sketchbook. It's about just about this big, really small. So just with that sketch, I quickly just took a digital picture of it with my phone, and here we go. Just kind of jumping into a little bit of painting the sketch in, I guess I could say, right? So I'm just going through this process. This overall painting, the full painting at real time, took about an hour and 50 minutes, almost 2 hours. I've definitely sped it up and took out some of the I don't know, the moments that are just a little bit kind of still. So I'm kind of taking you through this process. What I'm trying to focus on right now is basically laying in the major ideas. So with the movie Dune, I was just like, man, when the characters are riding on top of the huge worms, I was like, man, that's such a cool visual. So I'm just doing a bit of art. I've always thought that was such a cool moment, and just like any other artist, kind of find myself doing fan art of the thing that I get inspired by, Never knew it was called fan art until I guess it was kind of labeled that more recently, but that's kind of what it is, And so, here we go. I'm laying in a lot of this. So the basic idea here is we have the main rider, the worm rider, I guess you could say, in the foreground, and the big worm with kind of spikes protruding out of the sides. And in the midground and background, there's a couple more. There's two more big worms kind of diving and cresting over plumes of smoke and dust particles. These big dust clouds that are in the desert. In the distance, I have one of the worms' mouth open. I don't even know what they're called. I should probably do a little bit more research. But if anyone can tell me what they're called, maybe you can just help me out. But yeah, this is sort of the approach. I'm just kind of laying it in, and I always thought it might be kind of cool when when I ever see like airplanes or helicopters kind of going through smoke. They kind of trail the smoke with them. I always thought that was a really cool visual. In anime and other types of more stylized stuff, I definitely see that happen a lot more. So I just thought that'd be kind of cool. Like when these worms kind of jump out, it's almost like when whales jump out of the water. So like they're like trailing water. So I'm trying to work that concept into this. Now let's basically lay in the character here. He's surfing on the basically on the back of the neck of the big worm, holding these two sticks that are supposed with really thin string, right? That are supposed to like control and steer this stuff. It's wild, but yeah, I thought it was in the movie I never really questioned it until I can kind of think about it now. But I just thought it was always really cool. So let's get into blocking and the values. Right, I'm mainly gonna work on just blocking in the darks. Want to get them solidified and make sure that they're also working in like a good graphic shape. Painting is such a it's such a complex and layered process that initially right now when I'm putting in the darks, I just want to make sure that the foreground, middle ground, background, they have some shapes that just look pretty good. And so I think that this is pretty fun. We're going through this entire process and now working on the background area. So we're getting some focal kind of read with just a little bit more values. And this is where it gets pretty interesting because now we get light versus dark. The initial sort of base undertone is sort of like a medium, and I can play with going lighter and darker. Sort of a kind of a traditional painting, I guess, mindset, you know. And I want to approach this digital painting like if it was a traditional painting, like I'm doing it with an actual brush and with real paints, you know. So let me just start with, now that I have the base undertones in there, I'm just gonna start working on the background. For now, I'm just working on this creature in the back, right? Getting some of the lighting in there and describing a little bit more of the internal forms. So while I'm thinking about lighting and where some of the areas might be a little bit higher in value and maybe some of the areas are lower in value, I want to make sure that worm has like a little bit of graphic design within the silhouette. Now the clouds, the big dust plumes, the atmosphere and the things that make this area feel like it's coming alive. You know, with the worm and the clouds, it's like playing the idea of contrast. The contrast is so important to play with, so I want to make sure that the clouds are very, very very soft, you know, and billowy, and I want to make sure the worms are more hard, and so playing with that contrast is going to be pretty important right now. So I'm just laying in a little bit of the base undertones here, getting the clouds to have a little bit of form, a little bit of scale. I guess also pushing which edges are going to be kind of higher contrast, so our eye gets attracted to those spots. You know, doing this kind of painting, you know, or any type of illustration sometimes, is we don't want to have every area of the painting be in full detail. That just makes it really distracting everywhere. So some of the mindset is like, how can we play with areas that are tight and areas that are loose, areas that are in detail, areas that are simple. So that idea of contrast has always been pretty intriguing to me, and I find myself following that even years later, following the same mindset, you know. Yes, so just kind of simple layering, right? Foreground, middle ground, background, and in between each major layer of worm, right, is a bit more is a bit of atmosphere, like these dust clouds and plumes where the worms again are trailing and pulling streams of, I don't know, dust particles as it jumps through, you know, the atmosphere. So, you know, a very kind of like romantic scene, you know. It should feel pretty, it shouldn't feel like dangerous or mysterious or anything like that, or, you know, like you're impeding to die right now, but it should kind of have like this exciting kind of moment, as if we were watching somebody surfing and there were dolphins jumping behind the surfer, you know. It's such a cool visual. So I think that's an important thing to kind of keep in mind, you know. At least for me, you know, for me to keep in mind. So I'm always thinking about layering. Layering is such an important factor when it comes to creating a painting with a lot of depth. And so, you know, as you can see, the smoke and the atmosphere, it was just kind of one big shape. But as I sort of add in a little bit more information, I'm trying to create more layers, and specifically overlaps, right? Things that are in front of something else, and it's pretty, you know, it's a really good tool to use, to get that sense of depth. So I just want to make sure that I'm really utilizing like the steps that work right, the steps that work well. All right. So kind of learn from the worm in the background. Like I like this kind of shell crested over the back of the head of the worm. So I'm using a little bit of anatomy to showcase what part of the worm we're looking at in that midground spot. Yeah, so let's put a little cast shadow underneath some of the clouds, the stream clouds that are on top of the bigger billowy cloud shapes, you know. Yeah, so I love to like zoom in and out. It's important to zoom in and out because I think it's good to be able to, one, zoom in and kind of get a little bit more precise with the mark making, but 2, be able to zoom out and be able to see the overall effect of how everything is working. That was one of the things back in art school, which was, all the instructors were like, step away when we're like doing traditional paintings. So it's the same thing, just like zooming out, making sure that we're able to look at the overall effect. And another good thing to do is squint your eyes. Squinting your eyes at this overall image makes it easier to see the overall like value decisions that we're making without looking at the overall details too much. All right, so here we go. It's starting to come along just little bit by little bit. I'm thinking about adding different streams of the smoke and trails, but I think sticking to sort of the original design here, I think was the way to go. So I kind of just got rid of that. All right, so pretty much it's going smooth. I'm gonna start working on the foreground worm now, where optically this is where the eye should be resting the most. Everything else from here is just like a really far background. And now I want to make sure I'm pumping in the values, pumping in the contrast. So the contrast is important because now the darks are going to activate. Basically, the darks are going to activate this shape to make it feel like it's really close to us. Because the darker something can get, the more closer it kind of feels like it's in the camera in this specific kind of lighting scenario. So just want to make sure I'm using, not making the whole shape dark, because that'll just be a little bit too, I don't know, like a generalized direction. But I want to make sure that some of the areas that are accented darks, the areas that are really dark and cast shadows, are going to be the darkest values that are in the painting. All right, so you got these spikes. I always thought, for some reason, spikes that are like on top of a like cylindrical form kind of like look cool, and I love how the shadows wrap around the form. And so I'm such a nerd about trying to get form to read. Whether it's putting a little crest of light over the top of the worm, or making the cast shadows behind the plating of the neck. Making sure that kind of wraps around on the contour of the shape. Kind of like geek out on that. So, I'm sure we all have those things, right? Like that you kind of geek out on. That you like, especially want to make sure that like you do it in your way. What is that for you? I'm very curious. I'm sure we all have that. Whether it's like a color you like to use, or a composition or design language, whatever it is. For me, it's like this design language with like spikes and shadows. I always like how that looks for some reason. So I do that with like the same thing with trees, or I don't know, other whenever I can pull that design forward, I try to do it. I guess that's right here is the ultimate foreground element. The big spike protruding. So just kind of working in the values. I'm trying to figure out what's the way to make this thing read the best. So the ones in the back, they're a bit more controlled by atmospheric perspective. They're, pushed off into the distance. So I'm not really, it's a little bit easier to control that stuff, right? But the one in the foreground, it's like more in focus. So it's a bit more, I want to be a bit more careful, I guess, with how I'm applying the information. Okay, so this is what I want to talk about right here. This is kind of funny. You see me? I go back to the background. The worm in the back, it's at a good spot, but I keep going back there. And something that I like to do, or it's not that I like to do it, but I find myself doing it, is when I'm stuck doing the foreground area, the worm in the front. When I was stuck, like I got to as far as my mind has planned. Then I'm gonna go to the background. I'm just gonna noodle the background. I don't really have to think too much about the background because it's a little bit less of a contrasting area, but it gives me time to kind of think about what to do in the front. I'm basically buying myself some valuable thinking time. So I think it's important to kind of like, at least I just want to share that with you. It's a way for me to give myself thinking time. I think it's important to share that with you guys, because not everything is like so well planned where you know exactly what your next step is. Sometimes you need a moment to just kick back for a second and be like, okay, what do I need to do next? I got to as far as I planned, you know? I'm just noodling, just kind of tightening, I guess rendering, you know, giving some things a little bit more shape, a little bit more design. You know, that worm mouth, whenever I was watching the movie, I would always like look at that mouth because it was like a focal point, right? It was like an area of interest. So that's what I'm kind of doing here. I'm doing the same basic thing where areas that I would look when it's a movie or a design, you know, the area that I would look, that's where I'm going to put in more information, just because I think it's what other people would probably look at too. You know, if I'm looking there, probably other people look at there too. So that's just kind of like, you know, the overall like mindset, you know, with something like this. A lot of people ask, you know, like, how do you decide where a focal point goes? Well, it's like, where are you looking as the designer, as a person being the author and designer of a concept painting or an illustration? Where you look is where you want the audience to look, where the viewers to look. So that's basically the thought, right? So anyway, back to the painting. A little bit of a refining of the streams of smoke. I kind of like the graphic design of the bigger pillowy smoke shapes and then the streams kind of coming out. And I like that shape language. It has like a cool calligraphy to it, like a cool handwriting, a cool style. Alright, so here's my attempt at introducing just a little bit of temperature shifting, a little bit of color, you know. The color here it's a pretty monochromatic piece. It's not supposed to be super like colorful in terms of having a color range, but it's like this, you know, surfer in the sunset kind of moment where it's just very atmospheric and the tone is very warm. So I'm just trying to introduce a little bit of color, like desaturated cools, a little bit more saturated warms, like pumping the red inside of the mouth a little bit, and maybe getting a little bit of cooler tones on the harder shell of the worm, you know? So just doing kind of stuff like that, just kind of give it a little bit of range. I was never a super confident painter when it came to like color. So I take a very like almost like a timid approach where I do a lot of monochromatic or dual tone, like warm versus cool kind of setups, and then I just pump in a little bit of color shifting at the very end. It tends to work for what I do for concept design, you know, because I work a lot within games and feature film, but never do my paintings need a whole lot of rendering, you know. I do a lot of initial, I guess, conceptualization of environments and keyframes. Every once in a while, I do get the request from directors and art directors to do a little bit more tighter work, and obviously that's just something that kind of takes a bit more time. It's the labor, but I find myself liking the sort of loose and tight painterly feel, you know, where areas are crisp and then areas are also loose. I was always a big fan of that look, and so I try to, I guess, emulate that as much as possible within my own work. All right, I'm using now an important tool. It's a smudge brush. Using a smudge brush tool specifically in areas of atmosphere and the dust trails and the sort of atmospheric plumes of smoke. I'm using the smudge to soften the edges. And so the idea here is soften the edges as much as possible to make sure it still reads like it's clouds. And if you could see, it's just trying to get rid of like brushstroke details so that the clouds feel a little bit softer. I'm not trying to shift I'm not trying to shift the design, but I'm trying to make sure that the clouds feel soft and the worms feel hard. Just basically getting as much contrast as possible. You know, in this painting, we're we have a couple of areas of contrast that are very vital. Light versus dark. Shapes, which is like curves versus straights, and rounds versus angles. And we also have hard versus soft edges. Something that we're playing right now is a little bit of shifting of temperature, so warms versus cools. And, there's a lot of that happening kind of all simultaneously, so, it's just kind of working in balance. Initially, when we started off the painting, it was just the base start, laying in each dark and the light and the sky. And then we went into a little bit of details. And then so at this point, we're really starting to shift temperatures a bit more and get the refinement going as much as possible. Again, one thing to note is I'm still trying to buy myself time. I'm still mentally thinking about what am I going to do in this foreground? I had a lot of practice doing the clouds and the anatomy of the worm, but man, this foreground, I'm a little stuck on how to get the details to read, how to get what's the right value structure to use. So I'm just doing it back here, taking it easy until I have to basically do work on the front, So zoom in and out, make sure things are reading. All right, a little bit more refinement. Let's do a little bit more smudging, just getting the edges to kind of play down. Clean up. And I'm saving that character for last. I was never a super confident, character painter, or putting characters into like a action scene, just with the gesture and poses were always a challenging thing for me. But I think, sometimes I get a little ahead of myself and I forget that what I'm trying to design right now is the moment. It is the narrative as the concept. Yes, there's people who can do much better anatomy than I, and there are people that can do much, much more better creature design, but something that I get hired to do is create the moment, and so what I like to do is I like to think about that a lot, because as concept artists we all have basically like superpowers, and just like the X-Men, for example, not every superhero has the same superpower. They're all different, and that's what's kind of cool about working in these different art teams, from films, feature films such as like working on Deadpool or Transformers, or different games such as Call of Duty. But working with these different individuals allows for us to like really learn, because everyone comes from like this different side of design. Everyone has a little bit of different history, and that impacts how you make decisions, right? What you think looks cool is completely based on a lot of your history and where you're from, and things that are non-art based, right? So that's why I think working with individuals like that, I think, are very, very crucial. Getting outside of our just like artist bubble and doing things a little bit more like with different people with different backgrounds and cultures. Anyway, I'm going back to the art. All right. Well, I think we exercised as much as possible the background areas. So what is left? Let's work on the front, right? So I think right now what's the most important thing is building up these values. The values are key, and I think it's important that the values are built up in a way that are kind of graphic. There's a nice gesture, I think, with that dark line coming, kind of representing the crest of the worm. The armor, the back plating, and I think the triangular shapes that are protruding out, like the horns and such, I think are kind of fun. All right, let's land this character. So again, I'm trying to work on this painting as much as possible, like if it was a real painting, So I'm just adding values right on top, and so I'm using a mid-tone of that very kind of muted blue, gray blue, and I'm just pumping in some darks, I'm getting the graphic design to read. So there's areas under the neck and chin, areas under the arm and chest and armpit, under the thigh and knee, that when we squint our eye, yes, we see the silhouette, but we also get to see sort of some of the anatomy, just based on the darks and lights, So I think what's important is there's drawing, and obviously there's people that could draw, this kind of scene out and really get meticulous with the line work. But then there's also just quickly drawing to get into the painting, and that's something that I like to do, So putting down enough line work to represent the idea and where some of the brushwork needs to go, rather than trying to get a perfectly finished line drawing. All right. Anyway, let's get into the character. So again, characters are not my forte, but I think it's very crucial to have a character in this scene representing this moment. So as we're doing this, we're gonna build up the anatomy as much as possible, and just kind of build up the darks and lights, and kind of think about what the gesture is, All right, so we have the form, we have the basic pose. It's almost like a horse stance, if anyone knows, like kind of like martial arts. So right now I'm just thinking about working on the costume. It's like this, just like if anyone knows the movie, kind of like almost like a skin tight jumpsuit, very layered and leathery, has these very cool, fun cut lines on them and design. So that's just basically what I'm gonna work on is having these harder areas, these plated, kind of hard leather areas, and then areas that are accented dark and things like that. So as I'm building up the anatomy, I'm just gonna work on this front leg, get the thigh going, and just think about the anatomy. Think about what is a good looking design for this worm rider up here, and again, heavily referencing back to the origin of what this all comes from, which is Dune. Just kind of think about that, like think about the costume design and what I remember from the movie. It was really cool. I saw the movie a few times, specifically Dune 2, where it's the the characters ride on the worm, and there's such an epic moment, such a huge epic moment. It was so grand. I remember watching that scene, I was just like, whoa, if I have a moment, I need to paint that one day, And so I was thinking about what to do for this video, and I'm just like, all right, this is sitting one night and sketching and thinking about that, So yes, there are definitely holes in the anatomy and the pose and things like that, but hopefully we're kind of looking past some of that and just thinking about really the moment here, So area by area, just kind of thinking about, when I look at a lot of the suits that are in some of the films, they tend to design it in a way where it sort of accents human anatomy, right? So like chest plates and foldable materials in the stomach area and things like that, shoulder accents. So I'm just kind of thinking about that, He almost kind of has this solid snake, almost like Snake Eyes feel right now, and I can't get that out of my head. Is for some reason with the color and the cut lines and him holding the stick, which almost looks like a nunchuck or something. It just reminds me of Snake Eyes so much. Anyhow, it's Snake Eyes meets Dune. Let's do it. So yeah, going back to the anatomy, just kind of shaping things out, and the head was a bit off. It was just a little bit too much, like head up here. So I kind of tilted the chin down, giving a little bit more of a dynamic, aggressive stance or posture, I guess I could say. And so from here, I'm just thinking about the wrapping that I remember that goes around the head. I remember it was like a shawl, or like this big long scarf that kind of wrapped around. So I'm kind of remembering that, and so I'm kind of designing that in here. Again, heavily influenced by this movie. But I want this character to feel like he's on this worm, you know. Other paintings, such as paintings from like John Singer Sargent, for example, I look at that application and I always thought it was, I don't know, I always thought it was cool. So here I am trying to emulate what I thought is cool. Let's do more cool. So this Worm Rider, we're getting kind of close. It's got the draping hood, cool goggles, awesome bodysuit with the cool cut lines. So we're just doing this checklist of all the cool items, right, that we kind of want in this piece. Yeah, it's just last little details. From here, I think the piece is pretty much wrapped up, because a lot of the little details that I add right now as a thumbnail, they don't really change the piece too much. They are little sprinkles of kind of sweet candy that we can kind of look at and appreciate. The longer someone looks at the painting, hopefully the more people can see these different elements. So I'm just gonna pump a little bit of a color, just pump the saturation, maybe get a little bit more brightness and pop from the sky, maybe cool down some of the shadows in the foreground just a bit, just get a little bit more color tone vibration. All right, there we go. Just kind of pumping that up. So again, just kind of thinking about that magic moment where the worm rider is just coming into camera. We see a clear view of the rider himself and the highlight coming off of the goggles, with another cresting worm jumping just perfectly into scene. I can just imagine the music and the sounds and the things that would be happening if this image was in motion, And so I think that's what's the important about concept design, is we're trying to bring in that type of, I guess, intrigue, when someone can look at it and almost see and feel, and that moment is just so tangible. I think that's what's important about concept and design itself, is we're always trying to make it tangible where someone can understand it and feel it. So hopefully I'm just communicating that just a little bit, and we're just wrapping up just a little bit of the last details here. And so thank you for joining me on this one. That was a complete blast to do this painting. And I haven't done a painting only demo like this or tutorial in such a long time, so really, really fun to enjoy this. So yeah, I mean, there's definitely more stuff that I can add, but I'm just gonna call it kind of from here. And one last thing about this leg, it's been a little bit bothersome, and I couldn't really figure out what was bothering me about, I guess, the anatomy of this guy, but I started to think about it a little bit more. I want to edit the leg and see how it kind of comes out. So did a quick paint out of the leg really quickly, and yeah, I'm just changing the anatomy a little bit. I'm already starting to like the direction of how this is starting to look a bit more. The other pose, I think I had the right idea, but I think the execution of the pose and the anatomy was just a little bit too exaggerated. At the very end, and I'm just like, man, something doesn't feel right. And so trust your eye, and maybe we can figure out how to get the proper revision done. But I think this is a bit better now. All right. Let's keep refining just a little bit more, and we should be wrapping this up. Thanks everybody for joining me. I have more of these to come. Please let me know in the comments what you guys think. Let me know in the comments if you have any thoughts of tutorials that would be fun to explore. But yeah, if you could do me a favor and just like and subscribe, and be on the lookout for some more drops. All right, thanks for joining me on this episode of The Process. We did our Dune concept art just using a few brushes and Photoshop. Here we go. So thanks again. We'll talk to you guys soon.